doubt that council. Thank you. There's no doubt that council approving the referral and sign-on bonus program will help us. And that's already helped us generate 2 individuals, but we'd like to supplement that with the staff recommendation to increase starting wage from $12 to $14 per hour. For us, that equates to about $1,700 to $1,800 a week for a total of $15,840 for the season. This year, we can absorb that within our Child Care Aware grant. We've got funding that will completely offset that wage increase. And then in future years, we can increase the registration costs nominally to absorb some of that increase as well. There's also the potential, if we get enough interest on the instructor side, that we can increase the amount of campers too. So I think we'll look at both options for 2024. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Crane.
Just a comment. Department heads come to us with requests, whether it be for funding, resources, FTE, whatever. It's wonderful to see you offsetting with how we're going to make the money back. That is such a pleasure to be able to hear that. Because, money's really tight right now, but you're offsetting it by another pot of money. So that I just want to tell you how much I appreciate all the department heads and what they do in bringing that to us.
Our pleasure.
Any other questions or comments? Our recommendation, Councilmember Bolton.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. I mean, I kind of look at this summer camp as the golden calf of the community center operations. So anything we can do to continue to make that an attractive option for area residents, I think we should consider.
Is there, is there a recommendation for this item?
I'd recommend non-consent just to highlight it, especially for recruitment.
Okay. Thanks for that one, Penn. And you have the final action item for tonight, which is consideration of the purchase of trail counters.
Okay, well, as we know, trails are a crucial part of accessing our park system, generates, foot traffic. We utilize the people that walk on the trails, bike on the trails to apply for grants like the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, the Kansas State Forest Service grant that we recently applied for. All of those lean pretty heavily on actual numbers and users within your trail and park system. So we began tracking that once I got here early 2020 for an entire year. And we did that in 1 hour increments throughout each park at random intervals. And then we extrapolated that through some of the gaps in those times. And then in the fall of 2020, an Eagle Scout approached us for a project. And we said, we got the perfect project. Let's have you install one of these trail counters. Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission was just talking about using our time more effectively and efficiently. And we have the ability to fund one. And so he helped us kick off that installation within a prefabricated wood post. So we gathered that more consistent information. We're able to include that in some of our quarterly reports. And that I believe that helped us in generating really strong consensus from the Land and Water Conservation Fund application. With that said, Parks and Recreation Tree Commission made sure that we considered a few elements. Needed to be waterproof. It needed to endure kind of the rigors of an outdoor system. Needed to be either a pressure plate or a laser guided system. And then made sure that we could share that data and it could tie in through Wi-Fi element. So we reached out to Mid-America Regional Council. They suggested we look into the eco counter model. And that's what we installed, and we've loved it. It's worked really well for us with zero maintenance issues. So staff is recommending that we purchase 5 additional trail counters to be located along 2 different areas of the Rock Creek Trail, one at Broadmoor Park, one at Streamway Park, and then one at Waterworks Park. And this will be for a cost not to exceed $18,150. We did have this as part of our 5-year capital improvement project plan, and we set aside $20,000, so this comes in just under that, and that'll be funded through our Parks and Recreation Sales Tax Fund.
Councilmember Davis.
How often do they need to be replaced?
The batteries?
No, just what's the life
Oh, so
Expected life.
they're warranted for 10 years.
Okay.
And as long as they're waterproof, you just have to change out the batteries.
Okay.
And we've seen zero degradation on the internal components. And when we first installed, there was an issue with the seal. But once we got that resolved, it's been working flawlessly.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Councilmember Inman.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, what about vandalism? So if they're vandaled, will the warranty cover that?
No, they only cover the operation in a normal working system. So if someone were to spray paint the glass or somehow dig it out, they wouldn't warranty those elements. It's pretty it's pretty hidden, so it's tucked out of the way. It's not really inviting for people who aren't looking for it. I don't see that being an issue, but we'll definitely keep our eye on it. There are a couple like conduit underground wires that are completely buried. So they come up through the fabricated post. And so a lot of those elements are protected.
All right, thank you,
You
Penn.
bet.
Any other questions or comments? Ben, are these relatively easy to relocate if we need to, or is it fairly involved?
Yeah, so that's really just dependent on how we install it in the ground. So these posts, the one in Mohawk Park, we anticipated having to move because of the wider trails. So we did not put that in concrete, so that is easily removable. And we'll probably do something similar for each of these locations where we know that there's a trail improvement.
Okay, and they can more or less just go on any old wooden post.
Yep, the ones that are included in this bid have actually, it's a recycled plastic post. And then they've got a section in the middle that's carved out, and then it's carved out from there to the bottom so that the wiring can come up through the bottom.
Okay.
But we could easily install just a 4x4 and just carve out a little section for it.
Okay. And we own the devices and the data, no subscription.
Correct. Well, you can apply for their subscription model, which gives you more ability to have them push notify you through different devices. As of right now, we're not going to recommend that. We go out to each one and just pull the data when we need it.
Okay. Recommendation?
Take it to consent.
Consent? All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ben.
You bet.
Okay, that concludes our action items this evening, and we have no discussion items, so that leaves department updates. Ms. Smith, any department updates for the time being?
We do. I think Penn has a couple, and then Brian has one, and then Emily. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to balance out the low application numbers for camp instructors with the exceeding number of high applications for lifeguarding. As of our last recruiting class for certification right now, we are fully staffed for lifeguards, which is pretty amazing. We're excited about that. And the second item is we're on pace for the Mohawk Park restrooms and pavilion to complete mid-May. So as you drive by that, you'll notice some pretty nice structures. They just completed the support for the countertop for any kind of rental or food preparation.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.
I think Laura wanted me to talk about the comp plan, so. It's the gift that keeps on giving. We had a meeting Monday night. Thank you all for attending. I thought it was a productive meeting. So we broke into groups and we kind of took a different theme from the comp plan and we reviewed the goals associated with that theme. And I thought some folks had some pretty good comments for adding a goal here and there, maybe rewording one so it's a little bit more clear. So it was a good meeting overall. We have some homework with that, and that's to go through the strategies for each of those goals and then to kind of prioritize those. So given the editorial comments that were made in the goals, Confluence is working and updating those. And then they're going to get those to us tomorrow. We're going to put them into a survey monkey that we've already prepared. And we'll send that out to all the city council members and the planning commission members that were there. And I think the deadline is April 24th. So we just ask that you go through that and you kind of prioritize your top 5 strategies for each of those goals. And then we'll compile that information. We're going to ask for your name, but we're not going to share that with anybody. Just the only reason asking for the name is so we can kind of make sure everybody completed it, or a random survey if someone didn't show up. But we won't share the names, but we will share the compiled information at our next meeting, which is Tuesday, May 2nd. It'll be at 6 o'clock at the community center again. And we'll send out information about that. So we are nearing the end, finally.
Yeah.
And I had something else I wanted to share.
Brian,
Yes, I'm sorry.
just a request. I will not be here after the 21st. So
Okay.
if I can get that, or just give me instructions on what I need to do.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah, we'll send it out this week. So if you can just get it back to us before you leave town, that'd be
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a survey amongst all internet. So just go and hit submit and you're done.
And if you weren't able to attend the work session on Monday, don't feel like you can't go in and submit
by all
your
means.
information on the priorities and strategies.
For everybody to participate. Earlier this winter, we applied for a Planning for Sustainable Places grant that we were awarded. And that was to study the Rock Creek Trail from Woodson going east to basically the Gateway site. There were some funds left over in that process. So we made another application with the leftover funds. And we applied for a bike pedestrian study. And we were awarded the funds, almost our full ask. And we got a score overall of 91 out of 100, which is just fabulous. It's the highest score of all the applications that were submitted. And we had asked for 55,000. We received 53,000, I believe, in funding. So we have a total now of 70,000 because we're applying funds that actually been budgeted in this year to do the study. So we're basically leveraging grant money by 3 times almost for that study. So we'll have a much more robust, well thought out study for sidewalks and pedestrian access points and so forth throughout the city. So that's exciting. I wanted to acknowledge Carrie for her hard work on that. It's well deserved.
Yeah, thanks to everyone involved in that. It's fantastic news.
Last thing, I just wanted to share, we were invited by the Johnson County Food Policy and Advocacy Coordinator from the Department of Health and Environment to sign on to a USDA capacity building grant for the farmers market. We've been aware of these grants for a long time, have never taken advantage. They are talking about joining on as a county, and Douglas County did something similar in 2016, which we followed very closely as all at the farmers conferences and things, which is sort of a joint analysis, investigating kind of structure and governance of each of the markets, barriers to entry for vendors, customer retention and attraction, marketing gaps and objectives. And then I think looking generally, it's hard to say upfront, but looking generally at where we can collaborate and sort of raise the profile of all of Johnson County's markets, but also in terms of food policy, where we can really boost vendor participation, farm to market kinds of avenues, and then support that with the customers. So for us, it was an easy yes. Wanted to share it with you. It's still coming together in terms of who all will be participating. So we didn't have anything formal to share to you, and it's a quick turnaround. We will be asked for a letter of support and a in-kind contribution in terms of staff time and collaboration, information sharing. There's no upfront costs involved, but just wanted to highlight that for you. They'll be preparing the application that we'll be putting forward in May 2nd. So just wanted to let you know that was happening. And if we have your blessing, we will proceed. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all the grant money. Does anybody else want to come forward with grant money?
Also, just I know you all know, but the cleanup will be April 22nd. Citywide cleanup, Beverly Park, 9 a.m. Don't miss it. If you haven't registered, I'm sure Robin has you all squared away, but if you need to tell anyone, we can probably squeeze them in, but it's going to be great. We'll have breakfast, we'll have live music. It'll be the same fun kickoff we had last time, and we'll clean up some
Do you know
litter.
how many volunteers we have right now?
We're very close to 100, I think. It's just great. We have a very strong showing from groups all around. So it should be great. Thanks.
When do we pick up our shirts? Friday?
Yeah, we'll send out a note to everyone who's registered, including all of you. And we'll have t-shirt pickup, which you can tell all your neighbors and friends as well, because I know a lot of word of mouth spreads, but we wanted to sort of shift some of that to Friday. So we'll be here in the lobby with shirt, just like a race, packet pickup. That's what we're thinking of it.
Any more department updates? Okay. That's the end of the agenda. It is 7:37 p.m. with no further discussion. That concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. And again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you all very much.
All right, thank you, Chairman Josie. I will go ahead and jump into the Finance and Administration Committee now. If you do need to use the restroom, feel free to just get up and do that if need be. It is now 7:37 p.m. and I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. While this meeting is being held in person in consideration of the ongoing COVID-19 health concerns, we are offering the option for the public to participate through Zoom if preferred. Instructions on how to attend virtually are included in the calendar item listed on missionks.org. The public is also invited to participate in this meeting. If you are participating through Zoom, please either add your comment in the chat feature and it will be read out loud, or note that you would like to speak and we will call on you to come make your comment verbally. Please remember your comments and questions are visible to everyone in the meeting. And if you are part of our in-person group tonight, please raise your hand and stay seated, and we will call on you to go to the lectern to make your comment. When you do that, please state your city and residence for the record. And this meeting will also be recorded on the city's website at missionks.org. And you can contact our admin offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. Ms. Folks, will you please call the roll?
Thomas. Here. Boltinghouse.
Here.
Loudon. Here. Ryard.
Here.
Ring.
Here.
Inman.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Folks. We will now proceed with our agenda. Our first item of business this evening is public comment. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment now? All right, doesn't look like there are any. So we will now move into the public presentations hearing, which we don't have any there either. So we will now move into our regular agenda. And our first action item this evening is acceptance of the meeting minutes with Robin Folks.
Thank you. The draft minutes of the March 1st Finance and Administration Committee minutes are in your packet for review and acceptance tonight.
All right. Consent agenda. Great. Our second action item this evening is consideration of a cereal malt beverage application for Tacos on Lamar, Tacos al Gallo, also from Robin Folks.
All right. So state statutes and the Mission's municipal code requires that businesses wanting to sell beer, CMB, complete an application and apply with this city. So we've done a background check on everyone that's involved with the business. They've paid their fee. They've provided all the documentation and everything has been approved by the police department. So Tacos on Lamar LLC, DBA Tacos El Gallo will take the place of Lalo's over on Lamar. They're getting ready to open and their background check has been completed and we are ready for council consideration and approval for their CMB license.
Any consideration or recommendation on this? Yeah, Kim?
Recommend we take this to consent.
Yeah, enthusiastic agreement on that one.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, our third action item is a consideration of a resolution for the 2023 city-sponsored festival events from Penn, Almoney.
So each year, we host a few events that require alcohol for individuals to enjoy themselves and maybe to lighten the mood. But we're proposing Mission Summer Family Picnic, a yoga on deck, and music in the park for your consideration to allow alcohol to be served at those. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
Just a question. Do we have a location for the Mission Summer Picnic?
Yes, Broadmoor.
Thank you.
Not Mohawk?
Councilmember Davis.
Recommend we take this to consent.
Okay, our next item is consideration of a declaration of surplus equipment with Emily Randall.
The transition of financial tasks has begun to the point that Mr. Scott prepared this item, but put my name on it. So thank you to him. Next time it will be my work and my name, not this time. But as you know, we oftentimes are required, well, we always are required to come to you periodically to approve a resolution that provides for the sale and disposal of surplus equipment. We have those items for you listed in your packet. It includes 2 vehicles, one from Parks and Recreation and one from police, and then various electronic equipment that we would like to declare surplus.
Any comments or questions from the committee on this item?
Recommend we take it to consent.
All right. Thank you, Emily. All right. Our 5th item this evening is with Laura Smith, consideration of a pre-development agreement with Millhouse Development.
Yes, thank you. And Councilmember Boltinghouse reminded me that we didn't do our homework as staff and come up with a new, better name for these agreements. So duly noted, and we will go back and work on that. What's included in your packet this evening is our standard pre-development agreement with Millhouse. This is an agreement that we have historically entered into with a developer who is seeking incentives from the city. In this case, for example, where a developer does not own all of the properties, it will designate this particular developer as the developer of record. And that we are entering into for a specified period of time to negotiate with them as it relates to the incentives. The most important thing that the pre-development agreement does for the city is it requires the developer to escrow funds to cover the cost of our financial advisor, bond counsel, and land use attorney as we evaluate the request for incentives. So as we go through that process, the city and our residents and taxpayers are not on the hook for that evaluation that occurs. And so again, that is as we know, we had the neighborhood meeting back on March 20th with Millhouse. They have submitted plans and we would expect here in the next few meetings to bring back kind of another presentation with more information and specifics around their request for incentives. But in order to do that and to really get started in that evaluation process, we would like to get the pre-development agreement in place and have those funds escrowed for that purpose.
Councilmember Davis.
As we get into these matters, it seems like council doesn't have an opportunity to really protest when it comes to abatement requests, tax abatement requests.
Well, you have the ultimate form of protest because it's completely within your discretion to approve or deny. So you cannot we can't prohibit someone from making the ask.
I understand.
Yeah.
But in this question, I guess in this case, are they asking for a tax abatement similar to the one that we discussed?
Yes, their intent is to ask for a tax abatement. We don't know. They haven't quantified the request. But yes, they would be asking for tax abatement as opposed to a TIF or some other form of incentive.
Okay, because I remember at the last time we voted, some of us voted against it on the basis that we don't really condone the request for tax abatements. And so by approving the agreement, we're basically tacitly saying it's okay.
No, I don't think I would respectfully disagree with that. I think what you're saying is I can't turn you away. I can't turn any property owner away from coming to ask for assistance or an incentive from the city. What we want to do is make sure that if we are in a position of needing to evaluate that request, that we don't incur additional expenses in the process of doing that. And that's all this pre-development agreement is saying, is that we're going to cover those costs while we collect the data. In fact, the agreement explicitly says it does not commit you to the use of any incentives. So I think the more that you can become comfortable with understanding this pre-development agreement does nothing but protect you and our residents, the less it will feel like. And again, if anybody has suggestions about better language, I'm certainly wide open to that, because I know it does become, the negotiation of the development agreement is when you think you have potentially reached those terms, and then you're finalizing those, and that essentially what becomes a contract document.
Preliminary reimbursement memorandum.
Okay. Write that one down and give it to me.
I'd like to say thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I just wanted to reframe your comments, Laura, just to make it crystal clear that the only thing that a no vote on the pre-development agreement does is put us on the hook for the fees, as opposed to putting the developer on the hook for the fees, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Would it be possible if any of these projects are coming forth with tax deferrals, tax abatements, et cetera, that we have in front of us an analysis of how much money the city will be losing over that 10, 20-year period?
Yes, but until we have them escrow the funds to pay our financial advisor to complete that analysis, we can't make it available to you. So if I go ask Mr. Kimmel hasn't received the information from the developer, and if I turn him loose to work on that before I have this pre-development agreement in place, then we are, again, as the mayor said, we're on the hook for those costs.
I understand the pre-development. I'm okay with the pre-development agreement.
Yeah, no, we won't come back and ask you. I mean, similar to, what has happened. I mean, the Gateway isn't a tax abatement. It was a TIF, but you will have a report from Mr. Kimmel after he's done that analysis and to bring back and share with you those specific financial impacts associated with whatever the request is.
That's before we vote on the project itself.
Before you vote on the use of incentives. It doesn't have anything to do with the planning and development side of that.
But it does have something to do with the project because it's a funding issue.
Yes, so that if the developer is unable to do that, and I think that Mr. Scott referenced this evening, the block project, which was recently, the final development plan was recently approved by the Planning Commission. They have, at this point, they've indicated to us that they may or may not come back and ask for incentives. And so if they chose to build the project as approved by the Planning Commission without the use of incentives, they have that is in place, and they would have the green light for that. If they intend to ask for incentives of any type, then it will come back through the city council for review and evaluation and consideration. But again, so if somebody wants to come in and build a project without incentives, you have the controls and the processes in place on the plan review side. But that really, even though oftentimes they run on parallel tracks, the incentive process is different than the plan approval process.
We have one that's not asking, and that's the preserve. But the other ones that are coming forth to ask, it seems like there's a lot of staff time and a lot of development time and time on the developer himself, him or herself, that if they're not going to get it, would they do all this work up to that point? It kind of seems like it's.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg though, because until they get far enough invested to give you enough information and to present enough that you can take an issue to a neighborhood meeting and start to get feedback in that fashion, it's really difficult to say, is it this a project we're interested in or not, right? So everybody has to sort of enter into it, and the developers do that knowing that at this point, Millhouse has spent a tremendous, I have no idea how much, but a tremendous amount of money and getting plans and things to this point. They've indicated that, and we've made no promises about incentives. We've been very clear that, that will have to go through a separate process.
Real quick, I have one, and then Mayor Flora and Ben. So Laura, this $10,000 number, can you remind me if that's like a statutory number, if that's just a number we've decided in the interest of kind of updating our numbers and sort of staying on top of that? I wasn't sure if that number needs to be updated at all.
No, I think what we do is we ask for an initial escrow of $10,000. What we found is that gets the ball rolling. If we find that either the project is continuing forward or we need more time, we will ask the developer to add funds to that escrow. So it's really just to establish that amount, and that's been relatively successful.
Okay. Mayor Flora, then Councilmember Chelsea.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight another piece of the pre-development agreement, which is that by signing and agreeing to the pre-development agreement, the developer is in fact explicitly acknowledging that the consideration of the incentives is in our sole discretion. So, I mean, that would already be the case, but I think it really makes clear that everyone early on in the process understands that it's, our discretion, and like Laura said, your ultimate voice, your vote at the end of the day on whether you want to grant those incentives or not.
And Laura, much like the mayor clarified the incentive portion or the pre-development agreement earlier, I want to make sure I have this right. With planning and development requests, we're also obliged to at least evaluate and hear those requests and applications, and it's sort of on the developer's timeline when they start that process, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one comment, and I don't know how this fits in, but down the road, as we're looking at multiple projects, and I don't know how the council will vote one way or another, but if they start moving forward with the TIF, tax abatement, tax deferral, et cetera, are we legally on the hook if we give it to one and not to another?
No. Each project is very different. And so you're evaluating a variety of different factors and incentivizing potentially different things. So you are not, again, it's discretionary on a project by project basis.
But it is setting potential precedent.
Well, you're going to have a conversation, I will guarantee you, because we do it all the time with every developer that walks through the door. Well, we know what you did for so-and-so, and that's where we'd like to start. And we are well-versed at backing the bus up from there and saying, well, guess what? We're going to start here, and your project is new. And we understand what we've done previously on projects, but we put a fresh set of eyes on every project, and you have absolutely the legal right and ability to do that.
And again, if they sign the pre-development agreement, they're actually explicitly acknowledging that it's in our discretion, right?
Yep. It is section where that is, but.
All right, is there a recommendation from council on this item?
I recommend acceptance. I assume non-consent is the.
Okay.
Ask.
Okay, so the next item then is also with Laura Smith. This is a action item adopting the definition of anti-Semitism.
Yes, so you may recall during our March 15th meeting, we had representatives here from the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee, who presented information on sort of the increasing number of incidents of anti-Semitism across the country, and also here in Johnson County and in the metropolitan area. And so they have been working with cities throughout the region to sort of educate and seek adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism. It proposed a resolution. I know that, and Council Member Thomas is probably more familiar. I think she's been a participant in meetings in some of the other communities as they've kind of worked through these issues. But we brought forward a resolution that seems to, I think, meet the goals and objectives of the JCRB and AJC and the communities that are seeking to implement that definition. So I don't know if Councilmember Thomas, you would have anything to add to that? Okay.
All right, any recommendation or comments on this item from council?
Recommend acceptance.
Sounds good. All right.
Trent, was that not
You want consent or regular agenda? Regular agenda. Okay.
All right. The next item was with Dan Madden. Consideration of purchase and installation of automated license plate readers. Oh, sorry. That's right. Sorry, Dan. Yeah.
Hello again. We, as you are probably familiar, do a review annually of our personnel policies and guidelines. Usually this comes timed with the beginning of the year. It did not come that time frame this time, mostly for staff capacity reasons. We also have switched to consulting, our human resources consulting with the employer's resource. And so since we're working with Sandy Brown, we wanted to give her a chance to do a thorough review of our guidelines, just so that she's really had hands-on approach to those, as we'll be working with her and governing from them with her cooperation and guidance as we move forward. So this is set to, if changes are approved, to be effective May 1st. So we would pass the ordinance with that date in mind. The main thrust of the changes. Obviously, there's always a few tweaks here and there just for clarity and greater understanding. The main intent that I would like to propose to you all is a change. When we implemented the paid parental leave and paid caregiver leave, we did equal amounts of time for both. And we're finding we've had one instance of use of caregiver leave so far. And I believe, and I might be there may be other opinions, but I feel that the caregiver leave's principal use and highest value is to allow staff very valuable time to sort of stabilize an acute situation when they are the sole caregiver. When we've used it in the past, it was more for an ongoing maintenance, predictable healthcare need of a family member. And that it was extremely difficult to administer. It had a detrimental effect to morale and for that employee's coworkers who saw just a different tier of leave available, tracking how it was used, truthing up how much time was needed and how much was used was difficult. So I would just we've just provided some bumpers, shrunk the time overall from 6 weeks to 3, added the language for acute, a specific medical issue or caregiver need issue, and looked at that target where while we still thought it was very important to allow for an employee to use it intermittently as medical appointments or as things stabilize, maybe they want to stretch that a bit, have that general period of time be 60 days, just as a period of time. We want you to have the time to think straight and get this addressed and to do what you need to do for your family, but that we can put some guidance or boundaries around that we found would be better suited to our workplace productivity and administration and morale. So that was the largest change that I'm putting forward and just the changes associated with that. Mostly otherwise, it is just improving the language and clarifying things around different aspects of the policy.
Any questions or comments from council on this item?
Recommend we take this to council consent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, now Dan, we're ready for you.
All right. Thank you. As you all may recall, last year we had a discussion about a proposal to submit grant application for automated license plate readers to be installed at various locations through the city. At that time, since then, we have received word that we received $140,000 in grant funds to assist us in that endeavor. We've also worked with vendors, our neighboring agencies and other partners, Public Works, and to coordinate the efforts that go into this. When we looked at locations, we looked at crime data, and I included that in the packet of kind of a heat map of crime over a 1-year period. So we used that data as well as just the common thoroughfares that people enter and exit our city through to make those determinations. And there were also some issues with whether we owned poles and street lights and things like that made us alter the plan somewhat. Probably one of the most key locations that we were concerned about was the Foxridge Drive in Lamar. And in our collaborations with our partnering agencies, we've worked with Johnson County Sheriff's Office, who intends to install license plate readers at that location for their critical infrastructure they have in that area. They may also install other locations that protect their other critical infrastructure they have in the city, and we will also benefit from that. One of the key decisions that we went with the recommendation for Electronic Technology Incorporated is they use a system equipment called Genetech and have a program associated with it called ALPR Web. And what that does, and I think I've spoken with you all about the importance of sharing data because there's so many jurisdictions in the metro, and many of the jurisdictions use that same system, which allows us to put all of our effort into one platform. So we can search. If we have a suspect vehicle that we're looking for, we can search, and it's going to search other jurisdictions, and it's going to let us know that this suspect vehicle passes this intersection, 3 times a day. And it gives us an opportunity to then try to solve that crime that occurred. So that's one of the key systems. And the other one is, since this is a federally funded grant, we want to make sure we're compliant with the funding mechanism. So Electronic Technology Incorporated is an approved vendor on the MARC purchasing cooperative agreement, which is a competitive bid process. And one of the questions that we've had is, our intent is to send our data to the Johnson County Sheriff's Office server. And what that does is it allows us cost savings that we're going to share the data anyway. We still have control over our data. So we still get to set a retention policy for the cameras that we purchase. So we'll still be able to control that data, but it saves us time not only on the front end, but also in the future as those things need to be replaced. And as I mentioned in the action item, there's a memorandum of understanding being authored right now at the county level, and we'll have that hopefully soon. And one of the key things that we discussed in the previous conversation we had about this program last year is the importance of having sound policies in place governing the use of this technology. And we are working towards developing that policy. And I think as we learn more about the system and about that memorandum of understanding, those things we'll be able to shore that up and in a place and bring that to you when that is complete. So our recommendation is to, I guess the other aspect of it is the grants for $140,000. The total price to install at all of the locations that we desire is $147,637. So with council approval, we will use the Special Law Enforcement Trust Fund, which is the asset forfeiture fund, essentially, to pay for the remaining $7,637. So our staff recommendation is enter an agreement with Electronic Technology for the purchase and installation of the license plate readers for an amount not to exceed $147,637.
All right, Councilmember Davis.
Chief, what happens when somebody takes their plates off or obscures the license plate? What do you get in terms of the information from this?
And I've been thinking about that quite a bit, because as the prevalence of this technology grows, the criminals will adapt. And that's one of the policy decisions that we'll need to look at making, whether that be that our officers get alerted when a no plate goes through a camera. And we'll have to kind of play around with that, because depending on the location of the camera, you can catch the broadside of a vehicle turning and it'll recognize it as a no plate or issues like that. So we don't want to overwhelm the officers with hits, but I think that'll be something that we address in policy to figure out if that's a worthwhile endeavor to have that data sent directly to the officers.
All right, Mayor Flora, then Councilmember Chosky.
Yeah, I had a question on the MOU and sort of our preliminary conversations with the sheriff's office. Do you know if they will be aligned on accepting the parameters of our council policy that we develop regarding use in terms of their access, or for that matter, any other city's access to our camera data?
There's nothing to that level, whether they would follow whatever we set in place. They'll have their own set of policies to use for their cameras. So for example, if we set a retention period of, just throwing out a number of 1 year, our data would disappear from the system at the 1 year mark. So if another agency were to search data going back that far, they wouldn't get information from our cameras.
I'm less concerned about the retention and more the reasons behind the use. So I don't know if maybe that could be a part of the conversations as that MOU is developed.
Yeah, and we're certainly discuss that and tell you, different agencies have different philosophies
Right.
on how to use it, but the reasons for use are fairly similar amongst the
Well,
agencies.
yeah. I mean, yeah, catching the perpetrators is a pretty broad umbrella in terms of reasons for use, right?
Right, but I mean, you have to have, we're not gonna check your license plate to see how many times you go to pastors, without a reason. There's always gonna be a reason, and I would suggest, I would hope that, that's why the policies are in place, to avoid any misuse, and those policies are pretty widespread with similar language.
Yeah, I guess I'd want to see maybe what the sheriff's office / county policy is going to be before definitively deciding to use their servers, unless that is that they're going to agree to follow our policy.
And they're already up and running with it. So
Do they have their policy then that we could see?
yeah, I can get that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see that as well. I think, the potential for a wide variation in policy and just procedures, that whether or not it's about responsible use or how it's used, but also preventing abuse of anybody who has access to the system. That's one of those things. I think when you're in a metro with a lot of little, checkerboard cities, it's tough, but it would, I think, help us feel better about that if we knew a little bit more about what kind of standard the county has in place, and if possible, sort of what that looks like in other municipalities. I don't want this to become a huge research project, but I think it would be best for us to know what that standard is, at least at the county level. On the hardware, do we know what sort of the expected lifetime of the devices is and maintenance needs?
I know they have told me that Electronic Technology has installed these cameras in Kansas City, Missouri for over a decade, and those original cameras are still functioning and operational.
Okay. And they're assuming there's any maintenance needs or support that needs, that's not included as part of the installation contract.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I looked through the hardware list. It seemed robust, to say the least. So you mentioned retention policy, and if for some reason we decide we need to delete data or something like that, we can do that kind of thing? Or is it sort of like we just set a timer and 1 year passes and that's the only control we have over it?
To my knowledge.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have the deep
Yeah.
breadth of information about how the system operates quite yet, but from everything that we've been told, we can control many things in the operation of the system.
Okay. Thanks,
By user.
Okay.
Either.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I think that's everything else has been covered.
Hillary, and then we can go back over here.
Thanks. Yeah, similar question. Just wondering, I've seen a couple other cities have recently installed and purchased, which I'm very excited about this happening. I have long been excited about this happening. But again, just wondering about the sheriff's office servers, if any other cities are doing that.
To my knowledge, Fairway has recently had a license plate reader installed on one of their vehicles, and their data is also going to the sheriff's office server.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, if there are no other questions, I was just going to recommend we take this to consent.
Maybe given the outside from maybe do it on consent.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I think we have you.
All right. Thank you.
You can just talk to us about compensation modification recommendations.
Yeah. And I'll take the lead on that, but we're gonna kind of tag team that. We've got a PowerPoint. I think we've been signaling for some time some of the things that have been occurring in the recruitment and retention of law enforcement professionals overall, not just in our city, but throughout the metropolitan area and other cities in the county. We've seen what we cities doing classification and compensation studies, sometimes exclusively for their public safety departments, sometimes overall with their cities. And we are seeing just sort of increasing numbers and competition and just sort of this never ending leapfrogging of salary structures and salary grades sort of over one another. The council has been very thoughtful and very generous, really beginning with the compensation and classification adjustments that we made in 2017, again in 2021, and then also most recently with merit increases in this last cycle in 2022, so November, December timeframe, and trying to remain competitive and demonstrate the respect and the value that we have for our employees. But it feels like it never stops. So we wanted to talk to you this evening in particular about some of the challenges that we're seeing, particularly in the police department, with the caveat, and we'll make sure we talk about this in next steps, that it's not going to stop there, but we felt like we were at a point where we really needed to try and address the police department first. And I want to be perfectly clear that as the chief and I share this information, and the things that have been shared primarily with he and other members of his staff by officers, that this is not in any way being brought forward and sort of as a threat by our staff. It's just the reality of the world that we're living in. So sort of next slide. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing as it relates to law enforcement in particular? So we've talked for a while about just the change in people coming into or having an interest in the law enforcement profession overall. And we're seeing fewer and fewer applicants for every law enforcement position that is out there. Not just us, it is now also impacting and influencing some of the larger agencies and jurisdictions. I think as I referenced in the action item summary, we currently have a vacancy for a police officer's position. We had one qualified applicant as we got through that last process, and that individual had an opportunity to take a position with a neighboring jurisdiction for a starting salary of $10,000 more than what we could offer. So the applicant pool is shrinking. I don't think we anticipate that is, you know, a local, a national trend. I don't think we see that increasing. We are continuing to explore options. And I think the chief can kind of touch on a little bit later there's some other trickle down effects that we're seeing in terms of how that impacts being able to get folks who might come to us without certification into the law enforcement academy to become certified. We're seeing as a result of the fewer applications, I think we're seeing, as we are across many professions, I think you are seeing people who are reaching a retirement age and who are sort of aging out of the profession. There's just an increased competition in general among area agencies for officers. That continual cycle of salary studies, adjustments to employee compensation, particularly for public safety, it's almost like it feels like every week. It's probably not that often that some other jurisdiction has announced their new salary study and their compensation and what they're going to be doing for their staff. But the flip side of that is for an agency our size in particular, the long-term sustainability of significant investments in personnel, whether it be law enforcement or any other kind, is something we have to be very cognizant of. Those personnel expenses don't go away. They are not one-time expenses. They are ongoing expenses. And so we have to be very thoughtful of how we approach that. Next slide, please. I just wanted to kind of remind you of how we're structured currently in the police department. We have the chief, a deputy chief, patrol captain, 2 lieutenants, 4 sergeants, 16 police officers, staff support lieutenant, an investigations lieutenant, and 2 detectives. So the bulk of our staff is the patrol staff, the folks that are out on the street 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this is kind of how it's broken up. And I think, Chief, correct me if this number's wrong, but I think in conversations over the last couple of months, you've at least engaged in conversations with about 12 members of your patrol staff who are at least exploring or asking questions about the opportunities that they're seeing in other jurisdictions. And you might just touch briefly on what happens when we take someone to the detention facility. And
so it's all out there in front of their faces every day, whether it be social media with campaigns. Also, you know, when we arrest somebody and we book them into the jail out at Johnson County, the officers on, you know, all throughout the booking area, there are signs, you know, that say, if you've worked for your agency for this many years, this is how much we'll pay you. And so there are things, and some of those differences can be as much as $25,000 a year, which, I mean, we're not talking about something that's not changing your income significantly. That's a significant increase. So those are kind of the challenges that we face right now. And as Laura's saying, it's a double-edged sword for us right now. We can't attract lateral transfers because our pay is lower than what those other agencies are offering, but we also can't attract the new recruits that haven't been through any police academy or training as well.
next slide, please. I think this will kind of be a highlight. And this is some information that the chief shared with me a while back, and it's probably changed since this went to print. But this just sort of outlines the other agencies here in the metropolitan area that we're competing against. And you will see on this list, interestingly enough, that it is not just other traditional police departments. And in fact, I think the candidate that we had was from the KU police force, but you can kind of see where we fall on the list in terms of the starting salary for our officers. And you may recall that just a few years ago, we raised that and we were much more competitive. And this is just what has transpired in really the last probably 2 years or less, and how quickly we sort of shifted down that list. So one of the things that we'll be looking at, and we don't have the recommended range adjustments. You'll recall that a couple of years ago at the chief's recommendation, we transitioned to a step plan for our police department. He felt it was important to communicate to the officers or be able to illustrate when they came on board with us kind of an anticipated salary progression. And so there were some larger rewards in the early years as we got people closer to the middle of that salary progression. As we've really started to sort of dive into a recommendation for any adjustments at this time, what's happening in the market makes it difficult to make adjustments to a step plan that are logical and easy to communicate. And so one of the things that will be tied up and is tied up in our recommendation is to transition away from that step plan and back to traditional just salary grades with minimum, midpoint and maximum ranges, at least for the time being. If things settle down again, we may come back and look at implementing or bringing back a step program, but it just became really difficult to try to manage that through that process. So what we don't have included in our presentation this evening, but we will bring forward and make available in the packet on Friday, is those recommended ranges for each of our positions. So police officer 1, 2, all the way up the ranks. One of the other things, as a smaller entity, we're always going to be at a disadvantage. So we know that whatever we do, whatever we've done over the last several years, whatever we may do at this point in time, or whatever we may do in the future, someone will always have more money to throw at it than we do. And not only with respect to financial resources, but oftentimes we hear, issues about specialized training. Someone wants to be part of a SWAT team or a canine unit, or some of the things and assignments that we won't have because of the size of our agency. And then also the opportunity for promotion and professional growth. And I think that the chief and his staff have done a good job of trying to create and recognize things that our officers are interested in and to provide opportunities for training and development. But again, that's just limited in part by size. They really have worked over the years to create an environment where there were perks that were offered that were not just financial. You've heard us talk about some of those. So that's included relaxation of policies around visible tattoos, facial hair, the transition to the external ballistic vests, which are much more comfortable for the officers, implementation of varying work shifts, so 10-hour shifts as opposed to 8-hour shifts, among other things. And that served us well for a period of time. The other agencies have transitioned and are offering those similar benefits in addition to $10,000, $25,000 more. And again, as the chief said, when you start to talk about compensation differences of that magnitude, you have to really respect that our officers need to be looking out for, the well-being of their families through that process. So as we've looked at this, let's go to the next slide, please. So kind of recommendations in the anticipated fiscal impact. So just kind of going back, again, I think we wouldn't expect that everybody who has sort of come to the chief or other members of the staff kind of talking about what they're seeing or thinking out there would leave. We also don't expect that everyone would stay with whatever we would decide to do. We have historically had a turnover rate in the police department of about 5% each year. But the numbers that we're talking about right now represent over 54% of our patrol force. And so thinking about, again, those pressures from both sides about how we would replace that is challenging at best. So one of the things I've talked about the transition from the current step plan to a more traditional salary structure for these positions, an update in the starting pay for the police officer 1 to $54,000. So if you go back to that previous slide and just look at that handout, you'll kind of see that $54,000 is kind of right in the middle of the pack there. And so that's, as we looked at formulating these recommendations, that was sort of our target, and then everything else keys off of that. So if we're going to increase our starting pay by that, then we have to look at how that flows through the existing salaries for the staff who have been here for a certain period of time. So the thing about salary increases is they're never usually one number across the board. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. So when we evaluate based on performance, not everybody gets the same merit increase. In the step plan, not everybody was getting the same increase annually. That was based on tenure. So the proposal that we have put together would implement salary increases ranging between 6 and 12% for all hourly sworn personnel. And so that is, we have 3 salaried employees. And so the recommendation will be all hourly sworn personnel effective in May of 2023 in lieu of a merit increase, or really this would be an all-inclusive increase for this year. So we wouldn't have an increase now and then a second increase in that November timeframe for our hourly employees. The salaried employees, the 3 salaried employees that we have, would stay on that regular merit increase schedule with the rest of the organization and have be eligible to receive merit increases in that November timeframe. That right now has an anticipated budget impact for this year of about $195,000 to make that transition. So next slide, please. So first we have to quantify it, and then we have to figure out how do we think we might be able to pay for it. As we've really looked at, taken a really hard look at the budget, we will have some departmental personnel savings due to an anticipated retirement in one of the police records clerk's position. That position, you may recall, as we've talked about, is transitioning into a public safety clerk's position that we're currently recruiting for. So we had 2 municipal court clerks, 2 police records clerks. We're sort of shrinking the size of that down from 4 to 3. And so there will be ongoing savings as a result of that retirement, not just in this year, but going forward as well by the elimination of a position. And that's something that we do each time we have a vacancy, whether that's due to a retirement or someone moving on. We really try to look at and evaluate, do we have things out? Do we have those resources allocated appropriately? Part of this will be, again, we always budget for that merit increase for the year. So that's already being carried in our 2023 budget. So there's a portion of that roughly $195,000 that is already there and available to be used at this time. You may recall that we allocated between last year's budget and the 2023 budget, $175,000 in our budget adoption last year for employee recruitment and retention. And so there's taking a portion, not all of there's $75,000 that was allocated in our 2022 estimated budget. We used that to give the raises that we were able to give last November, $100,000 sitting in our general overhead. So if you go back to your budget worksheets, that's where you will find it. We hadn't allocated it across the departments, but taking a portion of those funds, again, not all of them because they weren't intended to be used exclusively in the police department, but it's about 60% of that total. And then we always budget for some increase in health insurance. And so we saw a 0% increase in our health insurance premiums for this year. And so we're able to capture some of that savings. So we're able really within all of our existing personnel line items, primarily those in the chief's budget, to be able to account for this implementation on that May timeframe. Now, can we afford $195,000 year after year? Absolutely not. So I think we're going to have to hope that things will begin to stabilize and that this will put us in a position, we're continually evaluating what options we have to save, reduce expenses, increase revenues, make changes in our operations that would impact any of those. But it's going to be an ongoing exercise to really look at that. So I'll stop there if you want and take any questions or discussion. I know Chief will be happy to answer, and then we'll kind of talk about anticipated next steps potentially.
These are regional salaries that are outlined here. How does that compare to the state of Kansas or to like areas like St. Louis or other cities in terms of the comparative range?
I don't have data from other areas of the country. I've seen some that are much higher, and I've seen some that are similar to our range. I want to say it was a city in either Nebraska or Iowa that I think was over $100,000 starting for a police officer. But you also see the areas that are in the same range that we're at here.
Also, to what degree is the county's elevation of their salary impacting this? Because it seems like their salary increase that was just recently created has really added a significant difference or differential from what ours are.
It's not just the sheriff's office, and some of that too has to do with the sheriff's office operations. So, they have a little bit more difficult time recruiting, probably because a lot of their positions are jail positions, and not. But now the other agencies have caught up essentially with them that offer the same work that you're doing right now, and that's making that a challenge.
And I think the one on this list, has Lenexa released theirs yet? So we know Lenexa is making a change. So they're sitting at about $51,000 for starting. But we anticipate that they will be releasing an increase as well. So I think, one starts it, and then because of, again, this limited number of applicants and people interested in the profession, everybody is, I think the sheriff's, what did you tell me the number they were still down in terms of number of total staff?
I think the last number I heard was they were still down about 25. And that's what, because there are no new applicants, all the agencies are raising that lateral transfer pay, including your years of service, because so it's basically everyone is poaching from one another to fill their needs for their agencies.
Do you know what the current regional gap is?
You mean vacant, in terms of vacancies? We haven't looked at the total. What did you tell me? Overland Park? You shared a number of some city that doesn't typically have.
Yeah, I mean, we are doing very well, currently, but the prospect of us remaining that way is a little bit nerve-wracking for me. And I think we do that just through the other things that we do and in a good working environment for the officers. But like I said, when $25,000 is a significant increase that you can't expect them to ignore.
A couple of things. Have we looked, when is the last time we updated our fine schedule? Because that's an offset to me of increase in police salary if we increase fines. And I don't know when we looked at fines last time, but.
Well, that's probably part of it. Well, a lot of that's set by ordinance, and then it's discretionary once it gets to the judge. So there's a range.
Okay.
And the judge then has discretion. So we're really looking at, I know the chief and I've been evaluating collection rates. It's still, and we still have some work to do there, because I think there are still a number of, I think there was almost, what did we look at, $200,000 worth of citations that had potentially been issued, which had not yet, for whatever reason, made it through the court system. And so trying to understand whether that is just folks not coming to court. But until they make it first, I'll get this wrong, so you'll have to tell me, until they make that first appearance, right? Or there's a point at which we can't issue a warrant. And so if we can't get them into court to issue that warrant, it's sort of out there in this limbo land.
Yeah. And we do have about a close to 50% fail to appear rate in our court currently.
But one of the things I would look at, and I have a ward meeting next Thursday, and I bring up things that we're doing, is the crime rate around here is changed. Is there not a differential on the risk that you take every day now compared to 10 years ago? And I don't know how you put a measurement on how we pay based on your risk, but we're not living in 1990 anymore. We're living in, people are in and out of the community with all kinds of issues. So I think that in itself merits looking at additional cost, because you're putting your life on the line in many cases that you don't think. You may just go for a regular traffic stop and someone has a gun. It's very different now. Am I off scale here?
Oh no, there are definitely a lot more challenges and a lot more expectations and put on officers. And I was talking with Laura about this earlier today. When I was on patrol, we hand wrote our reports out and went on our business. Now you have to log into all these different systems, enter all your data, make sure all your videos downloaded and attached to your report. And there's just so many more aspects of our job that takes a lot more time than it used to.
One more. Do we have any plans for a K-9 unit?
No, we do not. Although my old rule always was no horses, no helicopters, no tanks.
No dogs.
That's right.
The street budget can't handle a tank.
That's right. Don't drive it down 63rd Street.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it a little bit in budget perspective in terms of what we're talking about. So if we're not implementing till May, and for the rest of 2023, it's 195,000 with no future increases for 2024. You're talking about $250,000 plus for the 2024 budget impact, right? And then at our meeting with the county appraiser, we're estimating that 1 mil in 2024 will generate about $210,000. So this equates to, without finding money somewhere else, more than a mil in terms of a potential need for finding money on a revenue generation side, right?
Yes, correct.
To the mayor's point, I just want to caveat my comments with just saying I think our police officers deserve more than $54,000 and well beyond that. But with that said, I am very concerned about sustainability. When I look at a lot of these cities, just their tax base and their mill rate are really incomparable to what we have. And that's not saying anybody here ever wants to raise taxes. But long term, obviously, this is a must do now. 54% of our officers considering looking at other options. That number is terrifying. That's just really terrifying considering the crime wave everyone is experiencing. But with that said, long-term, I think that bigger conversation, I'll be anxious to hear and appreciate the mayor's comments.
Yeah, sort of had this thought a couple of times when we're talking about wage increases. It seems like we're sort of aiming for the middle and playing catch up a lot of the times. I'm sure I haven't been involved in as much hiring as you, but I've done some of it, and I've never regretted, paying a little more, retaining people a little more. So across the board, I've just had this sort of nagging thought that what's being proposed maybe isn't quite enough. I think we expect a high standard from, especially our police force, but a lot of our positions, and I think you have to pay for that. I think there are a lot worse places to spend money than labor. And so with this and a number of other positions where we're looking at catching up with wages, I wouldn't be too sad to see a little bit even more aggressive raise.
Well, and we can certainly, again, I think if you'll go to the next step slides, I do want to touch on that because I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things I shared with the mayor was that for many years, as kind of a smaller employer, as we had turnover in positions, regardless of what position that might be, we were often able to take a long tenured employee and hire at a lower end of the salary range and, have a little savings and have some time to sort of regroup. We're not seeing that at all in the labor market that we have right now. And so some of those natural salary savings opportunities that we've had, and I don't see that changing really in the foreseeable future. I still think we are able to attract. I think Brian was talking about the building inspector's position. Celia has recently hired a mechanic who she hasn't stopped raving about since the day he walked through the door. But we're seeing some of those other things. I think that the chief and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. We feel like this is what we can do now. And I think at least the feedback that I've had both from the chief and others in the department is they're appreciative of the fact that we're willing to talk about it and look at it. As we talked about a couple of meetings ago, it's been a crazy legislative session with a lot of sort of other revenue streams potentially at risk for us. The settlement of the appraiser's office with some of the larger box retailers. I think the dust is sort of settling. My hope is that by the time we get to our first budget work session at the end of May, we'll know kind of the final outcome of this legislative session, which it looks like we're going to be better off than what we thought we, might have been. I mean, even last week, again, this local sales tax on food issue we were going round and round and round about that. And so I think that as we move into this budget process and we really start to see and understand those numbers, it will paint a clearer picture. And if we have the opportunity to make some additional changes, then we would certainly be willing to entertain or recommend or kind of cost those out. But we feel like this is, so again, kind of next steps would be to share with you in Friday's packet the salary ranges. Then after the meeting on the 19th, the chief and I would conduct department meetings to kind of review and discuss whatever action you ultimately approve. And then we would implement any approved changes effective with the May 12th, 2023 payroll. And then we really have to, and Celia and I've had some preliminary conversations, review and evaluate sort of internal equity considerations for other operating departments, and bring forward others. So I think traditionally, as we've shared with you, a lot of times where we have our most significant, particularly compression issues, are in the police department and the public works department, because those are the two spots where we have multiple employees in the same job classifications. Almost everybody else exclusively throughout the organization is one person in one job title. And that makes things a little, easier, and there's not as much internal equity in comparison that happens. And then continue to evaluate and discuss the options for the future related to just the long-term fiscal sustainability of, whatever we do.
This is not applicable now, but if we're adding potentially 1,300 apartment units at some point down the line, when these come to fruition, we're going to have to look at increasing police. So that's just out there.
Well, I think we have to evaluate what that impact is. And again, it's, I think we've had several conversations about what is the right size of the department, what is the right comparison. And I think we have to continue to look at crime trends and time spent on calls, the nature of the calls, the potential increases in population, that we might be looking at. So.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a little bit more information about the internal equity considerations. I love that you're doing that. Is there a basis for that in terms of male, female, people of color, or
when we talk about internal equity, what we really mean in that instance, so equity we use in a little bit different sense. So we look at, in classification and compensation plans, you're typically looking at external market factors and then internal market kind of factors. And so all of our positions are classified. When we go through a formal classification and compensation study, we would bring a consultant in and they evaluate sort of the education and training requirements, the level of authority or supervision, sort of span of control issues. And so each position is kind of established, and then we classify those in the salary ranges based on common factors. So what we want to do when we think about internal equity is we really have that baseline and that foundation established. So as we move potentially and we transition back to bringing police officers into that salary structure, we want to make sure that as they compared to other positions that required similar training, that had similar levels of responsibility. And public safety, to be perfectly honest, is always a difficult one to classify for some of the reasons that you mentioned before. The nature of the job is very different. But that's what we mean there as it relates to internal equity. And then part of what you want to do when you make these kind of adjustments, when you raise the minimum of your salary range, is you want to then look at people's time in position, right? And so you want to then, the greatest expense is then keeping people spread out with respect to the tenure that they have with the organization. And that was, we made significant investments in that in 2017 and 2021 across the organization. One of the things that it influences that as well is because of the labor market, as we hire people, if you're brought in at a higher salary initially, sometimes you don't have as much of that catching up, right? That catching up to do. So those are the kinds of things that we talk about when we look at internal equity, as opposed to the things that you think of more traditionally around equity issues.
Have we ever looked at where we are in that aspect though? I mean, just making sure that we're paying people equally,
yes.
Regardless of, okay.
Yep.
Just wondered.
Any other comments from the committee on this item? All right, I recommend acceptance. Is there Tim?
Yeah, take it to non-consent.
Non-consent, okay. All right, we do have two discussion items this evening to close out our meeting. The first one is with Laura again. That's regarding the upcoming election of council president and vice president.
Not much to discuss, just a reminder that next week we will have, according to our codes and ordinances, an odd number year, elect new council president and vice president. So that will happen next Wednesday. So we need to be prepared to make nominations, and we'll have that election next week.
All right. And then our last.
In terms of the two positions, we also have the chair and vice chair of each of the committees. The question I have is, can any of those positions be held by the same person?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And the committee chairs change over annually in June. So council president, vice president, 2 years. Committee chairs every year. And those you will do at your May meeting. You'll elect new committee chairs or discuss new committee chairs.
Well, forgive my ignorance on this, but what are the responsibilities of the president and vice president? Just briefly, if we could.
If I get hit by a bus, the council president becomes mayor until the next meeting. No, I mean, beyond that,
Preside in your absence, right?
In my absence, yes. And then I think council president also, in my absence extends more broadly. So for example, if there have been events and things that I've been unable to attend, Ken's been the first ask on that as council president.
We will, and I'm happy to send out with the packet on Friday, just the provisions in the code that outline those responsibilities, because it is not just to the next meeting, it is to the next election. You did say meeting. Yes. So
yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate the help with my homework there. Great. Thank you.
All right, very good. The final item then will be a discussion item regarding regulations for tobacco and e-cig retailers from Laura.
yes, so we're back. In March, we declared a moratorium for 150 days on the issuance of any business licenses for any new tobacco or e-cigarette retailers. We do not currently have any business applications pending for that. So, but we did want to get back in front of you to kind of keep this moving forward so that we can be in a position to make a decision before we would reach the end of that moratorium period. So I want to quickly go through the maps that you have in front of you this evening. The first page, any of the things outlined in red are just those parcels in the community that, based on their zoning, would tobacco sales is a permitted use. So there's no place in the city, no public place where tobacco use in terms of smoking is allowed. But these are the areas and the zoning classifications where the sale of tobacco or tobacco related products could occur. The purple shaded spots are the existing tobacco retailers that we have in our community. Then we looked at, as we've been talking about this since October of 2022, we wanted to look at potentially creating some buffers around certain areas, particularly where youth might congregate. So the blue on this first map are schools, churches, or other assembly places, such as the community center, Tyler's house, et cetera, where you might have those were the categories sort of consistent with, for example, we've talked about the city of Shawnee's ordinance, where they created the buffers. At our meeting in February, you all asked for us to also add parks into that consideration. So the green spaces were parks. So that we wanted to show you a clean map, all of the things that we're sort of factoring in that create the foundation. The second map, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, and it gets a little more confusing, is we created both a 250-foot buffer and a 500-foot buffer around all of those things, including a buffer between existing tobacco retailers. So you'll kind of see that shading. It's much easier to see actually on the map than in the key, the difference between the 250 and the 500-foot buffer. But if you'll, I think, quickly turn to what happens in 250 feet, turn to the third page. This is just the 500-foot buffer. And so what I wanted to show you here is that there are still, with a 500-foot buffer, you'll still see some of the areas outlined in red that would not be included within a buffered area, where the sale of tobacco products still would be allowed. We picked up a few more spaces. So we wanted to show you kind of, in February, we talked about expanding that buffer to that 500 feet. The parks don't necessarily have much impact on that, but they're included in there. And so the question, I guess, would be, as we move this forward, it would be a zoning code potentially. If you wanted to make any changes, this would be a change to our zoning code, and it would be a text amendment, and it would require planning commission action prior to city council action. So really what I'm looking for is feedback on, are these the right buffer zones? Would you like to see additional buffer zones? And then we could move that forward, if that's your pleasure.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if the state of Kansas legalizes marijuana, what impact are these ordinances going to have potentially on somebody that maybe want either open rec or marijuana, depending on, what the state does? I mean, and would we be buffering all those potential businesses out?
Well, this is tobacco, right?
Right, but I know, but I'm talking about, some of the way people intake is through vaping,
right? I think we would have to revisit if that were to be legalized. I think you've got a couple of locations that would probably transition in our existing sort of tobacco or e-cigarette retailers, because I think some of the CBD shops are selling vaping products as well. But I think, and I can confirm that with P, but I would think that we would need to then come back and be more explicit in some sort of ordinance language as it relates to marijuana products.
Actually, I have a question related to that, because I thought the vaping restriction was also tied to tobacco products. Like, I thought this was only a tobacco related ordinance that we were looking at adopting. So are you now saying that the vaping would be any vaping products regardless of product inside?
Well, I need to confirm that, but I think if it's an e-cigarette, is how it's currently defined in the ordinance. An electronic cigarette. So that would apply. That would be the mechanism as opposed to the medium, I would think, that you're consuming.
Well, we don't have an ordinance in front of us, right? So I guess
not yet.
So that's
no, but the current language is you're only dealing with electronic cigarettes.
Okay, I guess as we were undertaking this whole conversation, my impression was that it was about tobacco, and that we would, address sort of anything else if and when it came kind of to Councilmember Emmons' point. But I guess maybe that's a question for the group as well in terms of scope on those anti-vaping provisions. But
I was just going to say, is it safe to assume that any kind of cannabis legalization is not going to be like an overnight thing? It's going to come with some.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to hamstring
myself. But also
it's important to look forward.
Yeah.
And to your point, if we're going to look at the zoning code and make changes, we should think about future proofing.
Yeah, because this will be a multi-month process. So if you're talking about future legislative changes taking effect
Yeah, my intent was tobacco and nicotine products, basically, when this was brought up.
Okay.
And then, oh, sorry. Laura, I know you said that you didn't think the parks were doing any work on the maps, but I did just want to point out that on the very western edge of Johnson Drive, the 500-foot park radius does capture some properties that would otherwise not be captured.
maybe I'm misremembering, is there a tobacco retailer at Metcalf and Martway, north of the southeast corner?
There's the Dollar General.
No, it's Metcalf and Martway. It's the CBD American Shaman.
Oh, yeah,
that's right.
There's, yeah,
Strip
sorry,
mall.
easier for me to overlook.
Yep.
So Laura, you said there are no permits pending right now. Did Casey's already go through?
Casey's already had their business license and their tobacco retailer's license last year. Yeah.
This is probably a separate conversation, but just food for thought. And not that we ever want to get back into any conversations about signs, but I'm just thinking as it relates to these types of stores, I feel like there often tends to be advertisements that are really flashy. And I'm like looking at this particular building that's like right off I-35 and the potential for that. And I don't know if this is the place for, looking at, what kind of limitations on signs we could have as it relates to these type of stores. But I feel like that could be an extra consideration as just another layer of deterrence to consider.
Just to clarify, are you looking for recommendation in terms of going forward, in terms of the buffer zone specifically? Is that what you're
Yeah, I think
asking?
the question is, does the 500-foot buffer that we've shown here accomplish what you want? Knowing that there are still some areas that.
For me, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if the parks are included as well, then
Okay. Then what we will do is I will work with Mr. Heaven to draft ordinance text changes. We'll answer some of those other questions and then we'll get that calendared, but we'll be able to share back with you. It won't go to, because of the notification periods, we'll be able to sort of share that back with you at least for discussion purposes in May.
I think we got a couple more comments too, Leah, than Ben.
I just wanted to make sure. So the buffer zones are just the areas that we wouldn't allow tobacco sales in, but everywhere else we would.
Well, the parcels outlined in red are already the only places in the city from a zoning perspective where tobacco sales would be allowed. Right. And so then what we're saying is in those areas that are outlined in red with the buffers, if they're included in a buffer zone, then a new tobacco retailer could not move into one of those locations. We would not let issue a business license in that instance.
So that's a good part of Johnson Drive then with the churches there.
Well, and the other existing tobacco retailers. Yep.
I think one of the more important parts of this to me is sort of dissuading, middle school and high school age kids and keeping that. That's just a huge problem. I hear that from my wife and her colleagues all the time. How does our zoning code interact with like a buffer against like the Shawnee Mission North High School? Would that be able to be a consideration for where we draw our buffer zones? And
We can't really draw a buffer around something that's not in our city.
well, we could draw anything on any map we want. Sure, but it's within 500 feet of the school property. And that's probably the place I care about the most. So I don't want that overlooked.
Yeah, I agree.
So, sorry. Just to clarify, Ben, you're saying like, draw a buffer that would just kind of come in at the corner there and, to whatever point it would go from the north edge.
Yeah.
Not the north edge
Well,
of the map, but the north edge of.
Penn pointed out to me that we did actually miss Rotary Park, which is that little sliver. I think if we make that green and draw a 500-foot buffer, you're going to pick up that corner right there.
There we go. Yeah.
I know that we talked about a limit on number of licenses. Has that been abandoned as a discussion? Because that's something that we talked about.
Well, we talked about that, but we talked about the fact that the buffer would sort of act as the mechanism to manage the number of licenses. So if you have a buffer in place and you have an existing retailer that goes out, a new retailer could not come into that location. So we're grandfathering anybody who has an existing license. And then if you look at how your buffers would potentially preclude anybody being able to come in as a new licensee, if you do create the buffer between. So when we looked at this in February, when we looked at the maps, we did not show you buffers around existing tobacco retailers. And so that's why we picked it up on this map, but that's essentially the way that you would sort of limit the overall number.
Yeah.
To address the concern on the education level, look where Horizons is right next to there's no buffer there.
No buffer where?
Where Horizons is at the corner of Lamar and Johnson Drive.
There is, absolutely. They're in a buffer. Blue.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So there's a 500-foot
On
buffer.
a different page, Debbie.
Okay.
The last page. Last page.
Yeah, the first page doesn't show buffers anywhere.
Okay. It just looked like it was right next to the red square. Right, which is right across the street.
Well, sorry to keep peeling open this can of worms, but another thing that comes to mind is it looks like, is Gateway currently mixed use zoning?
Yes.
I don't think selling tobacco is appropriate in mixed use zoning. I mean, it's density residential potential and restaurants and any number of things. I know we're adding things to the pile here, but while we're in the zoning code and having hearings, I'd like to think about it.
Any further comments? Laura, does that satisfy the outstanding items you were hoping to address?
Yep, I think so.
Item, okay. The last item was department updates. Do you have any additional department updates for F&A?
I don't think we do, unless anybody can think of anything finance related or police related that we haven't covered.
Okay.
I think one thing, and we'll send out some additional invites. So just as a reminder, we have a work session ahead of our legislative meeting next week on the 19th, starting at 6 o'clock, and Celia will be presenting on stormwater ranking criteria. Be sending out some information on Friday for that. Then we will have our legislative meeting. Then we don't have another work session in the month of April. Committee meetings in May. Ahead of the May legislative meeting, I don't know the date. I think it's the 17th. It is the 17th. We'll have a work session ahead of that legislative meeting, which will be a presentation by the Lotus Group on the results of the greenhouse gas inventory study. And then the next evening, there will be sort of that community facing meeting that we've talked about to present those results. We've updated the master calendar, and we'll send out some calendar invites for both of those and get those back out to you as well.
I think you missed the follow-up comp plan meeting.
Oh, May 2nd. Brian touched on it before, but May 2nd is our next comp plan meeting. Every month is a busy month. Yes. Yeah, 6 o'clock next week and 6 o'clock on the 17th. Yep.
Are we going to get a final report from Stuart Little with regards to the
They will
legislative?
typically give us a final report after the legislature comes back next month for their wrap-up session. And then they will give us, they transition following conclusion of the legislative session, they will transition to sort of a monthly update as opposed to a weekly update, just of the things that they're tracking that are going on throughout the remainder of the year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any final comments? With that, it is now 9:03 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes our F&A meeting. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you very much.